Let's talk about somebody who is at the tail end of his career, actually calling it quits on his career, and that is former Pittsburgh Penguin Derick Brassard, officially retiring after a 16-year career. In those 16 seasons, he played for 10 different teams, 215 goals, 545 total points in 1,013 games played. So before we get into what we're going to talk about, because this is a Penguins podcast and everybody listening to this knows exactly where we're about to go with this. He had a very successful career. I don't want anything that we're about to say in the next 10 minutes to make it seem like we don't think that 1,000 games played and 500 plus points isn't a successful career. You have to be a stellar hockey player to play for 16 seasons at the highest level. But boy, is that one of, if not the worst trades of the 21st century for the Pittsburgh Penguins.
It's up there. You could name some around the same length, same level. But I mean, when the Penguins got him, they thought they were getting a, pretty solid piece, a pretty solid center option for that third line position, for building into what was supposed to be a third Stanley Cup run. Is that when they grabbed him? Yeah, they thought they were really loading up for a third Stanley Cup run at that time. And they got out of the first round, so there was some hope that things could turn into something. Whenever they got him, they thought they were getting someone pretty solid. I mean, he had 18 goals. He already had 38 points coming in with the Ottawa Senators, who were just falling apart. They were selling off everything they could. The Penguins got in on that yard sale and thought they were getting a pretty solid piece. Like I said, he had 38 points coming into Pittsburgh at the trade. That's not a terrible number, considering how not good the Senators were and just how the production should have been there. There was something stinky about him in Pittsburgh, though. I don't know how else to put it. He just, you don't want to say fell off a cliff, but you look at the numbers as I'm trying to, and it's tough. I mean, you see 8 points in 14 games to finish out that season, and it doesn't sound terrible, but it's certainly not what the Penguins wanted. He only had 3 goals in that time. And without looking at the postseason numbers, I kind of forget, but it just didn't work out, especially if you look into the next year whenever they traded him after 40 games, 9 goals in that time. Yeah, there was something about Derick Brassard in Pittsburgh that didn't work, because he would go on to have one more pretty successful season, at least, back with the Islanders when he had 32. Mm-hmm. So he had it in the tank still. The Penguins just weren't a system that fit for him.
And it's interesting, too, because I think there's a little bit of what's the word I'm looking for? There's a little bit of a connection to today's Pittsburgh Penguins, because Riley Smith, same number, which is a coincidence. Riley Smith, just for some reason, stellar player before he comes to Pittsburgh, and it doesn't work. There's something off. And it's not just when you watch the game. It's not just the counting stats. It's the feel of him playing with like Evgeny Malkin, with Sidney Crosby, with his position in the lineup. It just feels like something's not clicking and something's not going to click. It didn't feel like it was going to click with Derick Brassard. It doesn't feel like it's going to click with Riley Smith. It still remains to be seen whether or not they give him a second opportunity, maybe that 40-game sample size that they gave Derick Brassard in the second year, but it just didn't click for Derick Brassard when he was brought over to the Penguins. And the reason that it is one of the worst trades is because not only did you trade a lot to acquire him in the first place, you traded him less than a year later and had to pay a pretty penny just to offload his contract. You look at the initial trade, and that was a 3-team deal between the Ottawa Senators and the Vegas Golden Knights. You traded away a first-round pick, a third-round pick, Philip Gustafson, and Ian Cole. That's what the Penguins got rid of. And in return, they got Brassard, who didn't work out, a third-round pick that they eventually traded away to the Colorado Avalanche, Vincent Dunn, not that Vinny Dunn, but Vincent Dunn, who played 0 games for the Pittsburgh Penguins, and Tobias Lindbergh, who played 0 games for the Pittsburgh Penguins. That trade alone is a loss if you're the Pittsburgh Penguins. Then you look at the trade that they made to get rid of him. Trade Derick Brassard. They attach a second-round pick, 2 fourths, and Riley Sheahan. In return, they get Nick Bukestad, who did very little for them, didn't really fit, and Jared McCann, who was good for them when he was here, and then they let him roll for nothing. So that trade tree in and of itself that started with the trade Brassard to Pittsburgh, just a horrible sequence of events for Jim Rutherford.
Yeah, not good. It's oh man, thinking of what the Penguins traded away to get Derick Brassard, again, they thought they were getting someone. They thought they were getting a useful piece. At the time, you probably looked before he played a game, you probably looked at it as, okay, that's about what you maybe it was a bit of an overpay even then, but you're figuring he should be doing something. He should bring something that if they go on to win a third straight, the Penguins were coming off 2 cups, maybe the morale was a little higher too. If he helps bring in a third, we don't care. That's 3 in a row, something no one's done in a long time. You totally forget about it. Then you see 3 goals in 14 games and go, this is not at all what we should have gotten out of him. And also the Ian Cole side of it ended up being a disaster for him in terms of being sent to Ottawa, but then immediately flipped to Columbus because Ottawa was a disaster.
Yeah.
So then you feel bad for a guy that just helped you win 2 cups, and that really doesn't look good on that side of things. And then the trade out, you got good years out of Jared McCann, and Nick Bjugstad ended up doing pretty much what Derick Brassard did, not showing up in Pittsburgh, but going on to do decent things somewhere else. I mean, not too long ago, Nick Bjugstad was a top trade candidate at the deadline. Somehow. So it's what that just goes to show some weird things that like third line centers come in with hype, play with nothing, and then leave with more hype afterwards. Oh man, Pittsburgh third line centers, but it wasn't ideal. It wasn't ideal, and again, you got good use out of Jared McCann, but everyone, a lot of fans these days look at Jared McCann as he should still be here.
Yeah, a lot of fans, especially when you consider that is the second time Philip Hollander has made his way into this trade tree here, because the initial 3rd round pick that the Penguins acquired, I mentioned they traded it to the Colorado Avalanche. That was in order to trade up to draft Philip Hollander, and then of course Hollander ends up coming back in the Jared McCann trade, or going out in the Jared McCann trade. I don't know. Hollander's been tossed around by the Penguins multiple different times. I think it was a return of Hollander and a 7th, and Hollander ended up leaving after a season once he returned to Pittsburgh from Toronto. But I do remember, you mentioned the 3 goals in 14 games at the end of the season. I do remember having the conversation. I don't remember if it was with you. I know we were in college at the time, saying 3 goals in 14 games is bad. Don't get me wrong, though. They acquired him because he's a playoff performer. You look at the playoffs that he had with the New York Rangers, especially in their run to the Stanley Cup final in 2014. He scored a huge overtime winner for them and was a consistent force in that playoffs. And then you look at what he was able to do the year prior in 2017, helping the Ottawa Senators get to the Eastern Conference Finals and playing up against the Pittsburgh Penguins. He had a track record of being a pretty solid playoff performer. Bringing him in to be a third liner to add some of that depth like the Penguins had in 2016 and 2017, that's the thought process, especially whenever you're going, like you mentioned, for that 3rd cup. You're like, all right, screw the picks. They're in a cup window. They've won 2 in a row. Just keep this rolling as long as possible. They obviously ran out of steam, and Derick Brassard didn't provide the jolt that they had wanted him to, that they had hoped that he would. And then it got worse after that. After the cup runs were over in 2018-19, then if he didn't start the season right, it seemed like it was never going to be fixed. And then the trade that you made, Bjugstad, I had higher expectations for Bjugstad. Jared McCann, who at the time was thought to be the secondary piece in that trade, turns into being an eventual 40-goal scorer, not for the Penguins, but for somebody else. It's a good piece. It's good, bit of scouting by Jim Rutherford and his scouting staff to bring in Jared McCann as part of that deal. But at the end of the day, you look at all the wasted assets on those couple of trades. I mean, McCann is the only player that had really solid production with the Penguins. And you traded away a 1st, a 3rd, a good goaltending prospect that has turned out to be a half-decent NHL guy in Philip Gustafsson. Ian Cole, who was a stellar defensive defenseman for a couple more years after that season. A 2nd-round pick, 2 fourths. It's a lot of assets for not a lot of return, and I think that's where you see, the Penguins for a while had the worst prospect pool in the entire NHL. It's because they were giving away pieces, and not all the time were they getting back solid results. And the Brassard trade, it reeks of it all over the place.
It always has. It always will. The Jay Fresh card. You ever see the Jay Fresh card for Derick Brassard? It's hilarious. It's production. Years in Pittsburgh. Tank. He leaves Pittsburgh. Production. It's a hilarious card to see.
Yeah.
Don't know what happened here.
But hey, outside of Pittsburgh, great career.